Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you are doing well. I hope your week is going well despite what occurred Sunday with the Cincinnati Bengals. We appreciate you tuning in live. We're a little, for those of you who are tuning in live, we're a little earlier than we normally start recording, but because if any of you are mothers or fathers out there, you kind of know the hectic schedule that comes with having a little one. And unfortunately for my usual co-host, Scott Schulte, and I, we had some speed bumps today, but that's okay. Scott Schulte is going to be joining me in just a little bit here to talk about all things Bengals. We're going to talk about, we've got quite a few things on tap this week, and we're going to try and condense it into a little bit of a shorter show if we can, but so much going on, and unfortunately largely negative with the Cincinnati Bengals. And because of that, we are grateful, even though the Bengals aren't playing up to snuff and haven't been all that great the past two seasons, really since this podcast was started. We appreciate you guys tuning in, your enthusiasm, and all of your participation in this program, even though we haven't really seen the best of the Bengals the past couple of years, really. So stick with us. Try and stick with the Bengals if you can. I know that's easier said than done, but appreciate you tuning in regardless of what's going on with the team. Tonight, we've got a lot to talk about, including the loss to the Titans, which was very heartbreaking, but maybe showed a little more promise based on what we saw the week prior with Jacksonville. And then we have the issues that are going on now with a number of players, the head coach that we want to talk about. Unfortunately, Marvin Lewis now is in full-blown defense mode as his team sits at 3-6, and he's really kind of calling out guys, not really coming to the defense of his players and players that you would think he or his coaching staff kind of banged the table for. So that's a little surprising. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about the Broncos game coming up, which is an important game for both teams. They both sit at 3-6, and it's do or die for both teams. I mean, mathematically, the Bengals are still in it. They basically can afford one more loss, I would think, in order for them to make the playoffs. This in order for that to be a reasonable expectation for them. So we'll talk about all of that coming up. And also, if you have questions, of course, as always, we love to hear from you. We'll try and answer some of those on air. You can get in touch with the program in the live YouTube chat. Every time we record live, leave your questions there. We monitor those. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. So follow us there and shoot questions over Twitter. If you're there, you can shoot questions every week at theobinsider@gmail.com. We also are live in all of our materials on cincyjungle.com. So anytime we post the live feed there, if we monitor the comment thread there and try and get to those questions, comments, things like that. So leave them there. Then, of course, you can download the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube, all of which is accessible through cincyjungle.com as well. So, folks, lot to digest, I guess, this week. We are waiting in just a little bit. I'm expecting my usual co-host, Scott Schulte, to talk about the Titans and other thoughts with the Bengals right now. And I guess that's where we need to start this week. The Bengals, to me, put forth in terms of effort level a much higher effort level in Tennessee than they did the week prior in Jacksonville. It's not saying much because if you watch that Bengals-Jaguars game, the Bengals just did not seem to even show up to that game. They got dominated in every facet of that game, literally. And that was a game that Jacksonville didn't even really have their biggest weapon in Leonard Fournette. So that was very disheartening. You would think that this week was going to say a lot in terms of not only where the Bengals season would go, you would kind of get a pulse a little bit on the grasp Marvin Lewis still has on this team. Now, I think on one hand, you would say just based on the effort level between the two games, you were kind of, you saw more energy. You obviously saw more points. You saw things that were much more positive this week. Unfortunately, this game just kind of showed not only the areas of need still on this team, the areas of age on this team, but it also kind of showed that this team doesn't execute well in the little things, and it also showed that this team does not show up in clutch time type of situations. Now, if you liked Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, you probably see me on post-game Facebook live sessions where we break down the game and what happened. And I don't want to beat a dead horse in terms of certain statistics, but there are a number of statistics in this game that not only show that the Bengals aren't doing the little things correctly, they're not doing the big things correctly, and they're not showing up in the biggest of situations in any given week. So in terms of the big things, doing the big things correctly, third down remains a big problem for this team on third down conversions on Sunday against the Titans. And that's not to say that the Titans, I don't want to make it sound like the Titans don't have a good defense. They're solid. They're fine. 1 of 10 when you have A.J. Green, Andy Dalton, a top 10 pick in John Ross at receiver. You've got a veteran in Brandon LaFell. There is zero excuse for the offense to play that poorly on the most important down of the game. Yes, of course, fourth downs when you choose to go for it, that's the most important down. But really, when you're an offense, third down is where you really make or break a game on offense, and 1 of 10 is just deplorable. On the flip side, the Bengals let up about 50% or so on third down conversions. Unfortunately, the Bengals allowed 6 third down conversions, mostly in medium and long range third down situations due to defensive holding penalties, pass interference penalties, illegal contact penalties. 3 of them were on Josh Shaw, which was, I guess, shocking and a little bit disheartening, especially for those of you who really like the player and his versatility and all of that. Ray Kirkpatrick led up a number of big catches. Delaney Walker, the tight end, yet another tight end, still carves up the Bengals defense. And then you look at the fact that the Bengals, with all of the talent and all of the pass rushers and the linebackers and all of this that they've drafted, they still cannot properly defend a quarterback that can move either in the pocket or, they design runs for or what have you. There was, I believe I tallied the stats. I believe it was 31 rushes for about 141 yards, something to that effect, and 2 touchdowns that were rushing touchdowns by DeMarco Murray. He obviously had the receiving touchdown at the end of the game to seal it. And, the Bengals just did not have an answer for many of the things. And kudos to the Titans because they didn't do anything very special. There weren't big bomb plays. There weren't, they made some plays on defense and that sort of thing, but there weren't too many of the back-breaking plays. Yet the Bengals defense on third down couldn't get off the field. The Bengals offense on third down couldn't convert. Now, my own calculation of some of those stats, I do want to give credit to Dave Lapham and Dan Hoard. Dave Lapham is obviously the color analyst, the radio analyst for the Cincinnati Bengals radio network, and I've always liked Dave Lapham. I kind of chuckle when I hear some radio replays and things of that nature, just because he's a Bengal at heart, and you understand that he is a guy that just bleeds orange and black, and it comes through on some of the radio broadcasts. But you see him, if you look at either the pregame breakdowns he does or the post-game videos he does with Dan Hoard. There was a couple of other insights that he gave that I thought were very interesting that played into the result of the Bengals losing to the Titans 24-20 this week. And he had, I mentioned Josh Shaw, the fact that he had 3 defensive holding penalties. I'm not coming to the defense of him. However, Josh Shaw, because the Bengals made the decision to let go of Darren Smith, and then he ended up, once they re-signed him to the practice squad, he ended up getting a active roster spot with the Browns, so he's gone. So because of that, a guy, Josh Shaw, who had previously gotten a little bit more reps in practice at corner, was now practicing almost exclusively at safety, and now you throw him into a situation where William Jackson III gets injured, Adam Jones gets a concussion, so it presses now Drake Kirkpatrick, who is already the starter, but who had been struggling a little bit that afternoon. Darquez Dennard is now playing on the outside, and then you have Josh Shaw now playing on the inside, and he struggled. And you can't expect a young player although he's versatile and he's made some plays at corner, he's done some things at safety and whatnot. You just can't throw certain players, especially young ones, into the fire and expect awesome results, even though unpredictable things like injuries can occur at a certain position. The other thing that I thought was interesting that Dave Lapham brought up was the talk of adjustments. And if you remember, I believe it was last season, maybe it was the season prior. I can't remember. I can't pinpoint exactly when it was, but Marvin Lewis had publicly said he doesn't really believe in halftime adjustments and things of that nature. Now, I thought it was interesting. We talked about, obviously, the offensive struggles, especially on third down. We talked about the defense and their kind of up and down day. And I was particularly hard on the defense this week. I just felt like, clutch situations, you got to step up. I mentioned those 6 penalties on third downs. The other situations that I thought where they did not step up: opening drive, let up a touchdown; drive right before halftime, let up a field goal; final drive of the game, let up a touchdown. The 3 most important drives of a game, and the Bengals let up 17 points on the road. You just can't do that. Now, what Lapham kind of said was that may be a bit of a residual effect on offense. And, of course, the Bengals had 2 big plays, a 39-yard touchdown to Brandon LaFell, a 70-yard touchdown to A.J. Green. Great to see both of those guys make big plays and keep the team in the game. However, when you're continuously going 3 and out, when you are barely getting first downs, when you score that quickly, if you remember the A.J. Green drive, the Bengals had 1 play, I believe it was a play to Joe Mixon for 12 yards or something to that effect, and then it was the 70-yard play, and then boom, all of a sudden the defense is back on the field. Now, it's not so much the fatigue factor that Lapham talked about that I thought was interesting. It was more of the adjustment type of aspect. And when you see a game often, oftentimes you see a coach working with his unit, maybe using the whiteboard, now maybe using those Microsoft Surface tablets, showing their unit what's going on. Well, when you are on defense, say you let up some points, and the coach is trying to install adjustments, or the coach is trying to talk about, what you're seeing out there and what to expect. When your team is going 3 and out or out and throwing incomplete passes where, there's not a continuous clock movement, there's not, maybe grinding the clock out a little bit if you were able to run the football effectively. When your offense is doing that, not only is your defense going out there exhausted because they've been out there for most of the game, but they go out there ill-prepared because the defensive coaches do not have ample time on the sidelines to install these adjustments and whatnot. So while we look at the defense and we say, man, They're sometimes, even though they're pretty good at getting to the passer, there are times where they have trouble wrapping up on the first grab of a ball carrier. There are times where the cornerbacks struggle. Yes, that's all true, but they may not have ample time to make adjustments and do things that they need to do in order to corral the opposing offense. And I think that falls a little bit now on Bill Lazor and the fact that unit can't even really sustain drives, whether it's even field goal attempts, a touchdown, or even, move the ball a little bit and punt it away. They simply, it's one big play or it's nothing. And unfortunately, that's not a sustainable formula for team success against anybody, much less a Titans team that was leading the AFC South. So those were some of my takeaways. And obviously, there's some other things that occurred both in that game and after it that we'll talk about. But those are kind of my takeaways here. I'm looking at some of the comments here. It's great to see all of you guys. Yeah, of course, the fire Marvin is gone. And then, it's more talking about offensive line. Michael Meyer says he'd like to see Josh McDaniels. Greg L is succinctly put it as what I just was saying. The offense sucked ass again. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much sums it up. Now, I want to say this. Greg also had a follow-up comment. Obviously, the offensive line, and that's been an issue all year. He, of course, pointed out Cedric Ogbuehi. To me, I didn't think Andre Smith played all that well, just from looking at the game and kind of the eyeball test. If you're a Pro Football Focus guy, they gave him, I believe, an 87.2 they ended up giving him. So a pretty solid score for Andre Smith, which was surprising to me. The offensive line is a mess, and Cedric Ogbuehi is obviously the big problem there. Russell Bodine is another. But a side note, by the way, Jake Fisher, the former starting right tackle, in case you had not heard, apparently underwent surgery to repair something with an irregular heartbeat. So last week we didn't really know exactly what was going on with Jake Fisher. We heard quote unquote illness, some sort of an issue with an irregular heartbeat. He had some sort of procedure to correct that. He'll still remain out for the year, and rightfully so. He should. That's kind of a scary deal, but hopefully he ends up coming back and playing at full strength and playing better than he has. But obviously, most important, that Fisher heals up and corrects that issue going on there. Now, back to what we're talking about. Cedric Ogbuehi again led up a big sack fumble that was recovered by the Titans, led to a DeMarco Murray touchdown. Big play, and just these are the things that you just can't allow. And unfortunately, there were both examples of that kind of getting into the head of Andy Dalton, as well as it just literally continuing on the field. And what I mean is, Andy Dalton, there are times where he kind of senses some footsteps that aren't necessarily there now because of who he has in front of him and the struggles that unit has had in front of him. And obviously the play calling is not doing him any favors. And the Bengals only ran the ball 14 times, and they were never really down big in that game. That surprised me a bit, especially when you saw Joe Mixon kind of doing some decent things. 9 carries, 37 yards. He did have the touchdown. It was over 4 yards a carry for Joe Mixon, so I don't really know why that was completely abandoned. However, I think, fortunately and unfortunately for the Bengals, he's young and they want to continue to develop him. So I think he's going to stay out there for the majority of the year as long as he remains healthy. Number one, they want to really see if he can grow and develop and turn the corner somehow, which I'm not seeing it, but I understand that mindset. But number two, who's there now with Fisher on IR Eric Winston brought back. Who's there now on this roster that you can trust to play left tackle? Andre Smith is the only one that really you can trust, I guess, and he really only played left tackle in the NFL this year. So do you really trust that situation? So unfortunately, Greg, who brought up Cedric Ogbuehi, I don't see an alternative there. I don't see someone on this roster who can kind of at least be a little bit of a Band-Aid for the Bengals on that offensive line. Not fortunately, and this is another topic that we're going to do on another show, but unfortunately, when you look at the first and second round picks of the Bengals from 2011 through 2017 at this point, obviously 2011, those were two great picks, AJ Green, Andy Dalton. But if you go year by year and you count Pro Bowls, you count injuries, you count all of that stuff, I think we might overrate what the Bengals do in the draft, unfortunately. And when that's what's used as their bread and butter, that's why you're seeing 9 wins over the past almost 2 seasons now. And I think that philosophy needs to change a little bit, but we'll see about that. Aaron Felix says, I don't know how I feel about the O-line coach. The line is collectively bad. Now, obviously, the offensive line coach is Paul Alexander. I said this on a couple of episodes ago. I know a gentleman who is an offensive coordinator at a small college program, and he annually attends a symposium that Paul Alexander has on coaching, offensive line techniques, all of that. And he says he is respected offensive coaches and offensive line coaches in the entire country. Paul Alexander's been with the Bengals for a very long time, and we've seen him, guys like Levi Jones, Willie Anderson, into great players. Eric Steinbach was also under his tutelage. Clint Bowling, Kevin Zeitler, some good players. He's never found a proper center with this team that I can remember in recent history after Rich Bram. And right guard continues to, aside from when they had Zeitler, right guard continues to be a mess. And then all of a sudden you have Fisher and Ogbuehi, and Alexander is not really grooming those guys to be solid tackles, Pro Bowl tackles, anything like that. And I think, unfortunately, with the struggles really over the past 2 seasons, even with Whitworth and Zeitler, some struggles last year in terms of sacks allowed and things like that. But I think he has to be in that conversation of, hey, if we're going to make a change at head coach, if we're going to make a change at a lot of different coaching positions, he has to be under the microscope. Perhaps it's time for, even though he's done, again, one of those guys has done a lot of good things for this franchise, it might be time to move on. Speaking of moving on, and thank you, Tom Brooks, Paul Alexander, 24 years with the Bengals, only just a smidge better than Marvin Lewis's 15 years with the Bengals. Again, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'll be joined by my co-host Scott Schultze in just a little bit. The other thing, obviously, aside from the Bengals' loss, they're 3-6. Do the off season now. Season isn't dead, but it's on the respirator. That's for sure. Obviously, the other thing that came from this game is Vontaze Burfict and his suspension. Now, I don't know how many of you who are tuning into us live at Cincy Jungle and on YouTube, I don't know how many of you watched the game live or if you recorded it and whatever, but if you saw what had happened with Vontaze Burfict in terms of his receiving of a personal foul penalty and his receiving of an ejection for touching an official. Let's kind of preface that he got a personal foul penalty, and then I believe it was 2 plays later got tossed from the game. And there's some, I don't want to say incriminating video. There's just video out there where it's very, there's 2 real strong sides to the argument here. on Sunday, I saw a lot of people talk about how, man, what an unfair call. And if it was anybody else, he would never have been, that would never have been called on both of them. And I do believe that they were fringe calls. They were borderline calls. They were calls that probably wouldn't have been made percent of the league. However, my other thought is, especially when he came out with an interview with Sports Illustrated and said, I don't play dirty, but I really flirt with the line or something to that effect. When you know that, and you're that type of player, it doesn't mean you can't be physical out there. It doesn't mean you can't fly around and try and make plays, but you have to know there's a bullseye on your back. That's just the nature of it. Now, when shortly after this occurred, in terms of Burfict being tossed from the game, I believe it was on Monday, someone who had spoken to Adam Schefter of ESPN, who was a Bengals player, he went unnamed, but he says, this unnamed Bengals player says, and this is on CincyJungle.com, and it's also on ESPN, so check that out if you haven't had the chance yet. But the Bengals player said he has heard officials cursing at Burfict on multiple occasions, and there is video that shows officials coming into contact with the linebacker 3 times in games. Over the past month, according to a source close to Burfict, the Bengals linebacker has grown increasingly upset with officials' treatment of him and feels like he is being singled out by officials. The league responded, saying an NFL spokesman denied those charges Monday, saying it's not unusual for officials to come into contact with players and that there is nothing unusual involving officials' interactions with Burfict. Well, it kind of depends. I would think that this is you either look at this and you say this is total tinfoil hat conspiracy theory and they're out to get Vontaze Burfict, and they know that, the NFL knows he's a hothead and they don't really want him playing based on some of the ankle twisting, the late hits, the things we've seen from him. Yeah, necessary hits, that sort of thing. But I kind of ride the fence here because I understand that, but I also understand that, what I saw in terms of on the video didn't really – I've seen him do worse things and not get penalized. You can't touch an official, period. But as one player said, who came to his defense, I don't know who that is, but they said over the past 3 games, officials have been trying to touch him or have come in contact with him, perhaps, and maybe trying to see if he will explode on the field and do what we saw he did in Nashville. So I don't know exactly where I reside in this. All I do know is that he's a guy who is very talented when he's on the field, but because of the way he plays, he either often injures himself, and you see that quite a bit, whether it's concussions or what have you, or he is not eligible to play. Ejections, that sort of thing. So I'm curious to see what some of the what some of you think about it. Clifford says he knows better. Just tough guy crap from Burfict. You don't see other teams' LBs getting tossed. No, you don't. But you, unfortunately, if you watch a number of Steelers games, which I think a lot of Bengals fans do, the Steelers have a lot of players who headhunt, who do helmet-to-helmet contacts, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, they don't necessarily get called for it, but there are others who did that. I see Gregory Hoffman. Anybody but Burfict would not have been kicked out for that. Bengals players are saying the refs are targeting him. Lewis should be defending him. That's a great point, and it's gonna segue into something else we're gonna talk about in a minute. And if you've seen anything from or heard anything from Marvin Lewis, couple of days, he has not come to the aid of a lot of players, including Burfict, in this situation. I think this one, though, particularly, I don't think Marvin Lewis really wants to get in the bad graces of the NFL and the. So I think he's kind of playing it cautious there. I see all kinds of stuff in here. This is, yeah, I mean, Greg Hoffman follows up his other comment with, he plays with passion. We need some more players like that. Agreed, but there's passion and there's stupidity to me. And Burfict often flirts with the line between those two. Chris Brug, I think hopefully I didn't botch that last name there for you, bud. I love Burfict. He's one of the few playmakers we have on defense, let alone the team, but he is more often not on the field due to suspension or being hurt. He has to control himself on the field. Exactly what I was saying. And it's kind of the same thing with Tyler Eifert, not obviously in the behavior or suspension vein, but obviously with the injury vein and him not being available with the myriad of injuries he's suffered. Aaron Felix says, I just think a new coach could solve the bull crap with him. Maybe, but you have to understand that when Burfict was brought into Cincinnati as an undrafted free agent, we heard rumblings of how grateful he was to Marvin Lewis, how he called Marvin Lewis, said, hey, you know, this guy overweight and didn't work out well. This guy that is being painted as a hothead and not a good player is not who I am. You know, once Burfict kind of made that Pro Bowl in 2013, you heard him kind of talk about Marvin Lewis as a potential father figure. So if that's true, if a potential father figure and head football coach of an NFL team can't reel him in, then I don't know who else could. I mean, there's probably someone out there who could, but we'll see. Tom Brooks says you don't step on players' hands and arms and act like it's an accident. Hard to defend, but well worth it. Even my Steelers friend admitted that they would gladly take him on their team. Chris Barry asked, Anthony, any positive things about the Bengals? There probably are, but for now, we're talking about some of the things that are going on with the club, and it's a little negative right now. I'm going to try. I've always tried to be at least a little positive, but try and be realistic. Unfortunately, at 3-6, there's just not a lot going on right now that is very positive. But hey, if it's there, we'll try and talk about it. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. I'm hoping to be joined by my colleague Scott Schultze in just a few minutes to talk about other topics with the Cincinnati Bengals and their season so far. They've got the Denver Broncos coming up in Denver. Should be an interesting game. Denver was a preseason favorite, and they are also sitting at 3-6 with Brock Osweiler at the helm. So that's going to be a very interesting game coming up this weekend. The winner of that game barely keeps their playoff hopes alive, while the other, you're probably looking at the draft at that point, and reevaluating the roster, probably looking at some rookies and youngsters that need to get some playing time to see what you have out of them next season. You can get this program on YouTube, on iTunes, on SoundCloud. All of our materials on Cincy Jungle, and you can tune in every week, as I said, live on YouTube and at Cincy Jungle. And you can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI, insider@gmail.com. Yeah, you can leave comments in our subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the iTunes link. Leave comments, subscribe to SoundCloud. We check those out and try and interact with you. And if you've got some questions, I'm trying to be interactive since my partner in crime is not here right now, I'm trying to be a little more interactive during the show than we sometimes are. But got other questions, we'll try and get to those at the end of the program here. We've kind of talked about it, and I've seen some stuff in the YouTube chat and his treatment of some young players. This week, in a matter of a couple of days, Marvin Lewis has subtly criticized Jeremy Hill's decision to undergo season-ending ankle surgery. Apparently, that didn't seem like that was part of something that the Bengals and or their medical staff had either recommended or thought that Hill was contemplating right at that time. And you heard something to the effect from Marvin Lewis. I don't want to say he called him a quitter or anything like that, but what he did say was, according to local media, Jeremy Hill felt the need to have ankle surgery. Several doctors thought he could wait until the end of the season, but he was feeling discomfort. Lewis was surprised. Team thought he could wait till the end of the season. So, a Marvin Lewis decision, a team decision. That was a Jeremy Hill decision. Now, I think Jeremy Hill has probably seen the writing on the wall with the drafting of Joe Mixon and his lessened touches this year. And he hasn't really done much to deserve many of them, to be honest with you, but he's probably looking out for his future, his next contract, which will, in all likelihood, not be in Cincinnati. So he decided to get it healthy early and do that. From a team standpoint, you're bummed out, and you kind of wish the guy would say, hey, we've seen players over the years say I'm gutting through injuries and all that kind of stuff. But hey, at this point, the team was 3-5, now 3-6 when he made this decision. He wants out of there, and he's not being disgruntled about it. He's just kind of saying, I want to get healthy, and probably saying I want to get out of there. So you can't necessarily fault him for that. But Marvin Lewis, of course, didn't. There was a way to say this without seemingly saying it in a way that Marvin said it, and that's basically, hey, he had an ankle injury and he needed to have surgery. We thought it was less severe than originally thought, and that's that. And instead, he kind of put the onus on Jeremy Hill, talking about how, in a subtle way, maybe that he kind of quit on the team, but didn't come right out and say that. So now on Wednesday, Marvin Lewis decides to go out when asked about a specific play, and it was the only throw that I saw to John Ross in his 5 or 6 snaps on Sunday against the Titans, which is about his rookie average. There was a long ball that wasn't even close, and you kind of saw Ross get a little bit jammed in the line, then he got past the guy, and he kind of slowed up, and the ball sailed past him. Bummer, it didn't work out, but, whatever. Well, it's not whatever to Marvin Lewis, because he absolutely laid into John Ross. Now, let me preface this by saying that Lewis has been especially hard on John Ross, not only by actions in terms of how he's not being used on the field, how he's been healthy and active, a healthy inactive scratch, that is, on Sundays. And, this is your number 9 overall pick. You're struggling on offense, and the guy's getting 5 to 6 snaps a game. He has criticized maybe his conditioning. He has criticized his ability to grasp the playbook. There's a lot that has been going on with Marvin Lewis and John Ross so far this year before this last thing that came out on Wednesday. Now, Jeremy Roush and Paul Dehner Jr., two local Cincinnati beat writers, kind of broke this a little bit. But Marvin Lewis says, quote, him that ball, him being Ross, he expects him to make that play. He let us down. Let the key quarterback down. Had he been running, he catches it. Dehner kind of expanded a little bit on that quote, saying he had a play last week we weren't very thrilled with for Andy. That coverage to throw him that football. He should understand how the quarterback feels about him. He expects him to be where he needs to be. He let his teammates down. He let me down. Wow. To me, that is absolutely scathing and raking your number 9 overall pick over the coals over one play. Again, this seems like something, and you have to understand, Lewis is probably sick of the questions. He's probably sick of the micromanagement of the armchair quarterbacks that come at him with these types of questions. But inquiring minds want to know building with John Ross. And if you are that upset with him or you felt that he wasn't going to be ready this year, in a year, Marvin Lewis is in the last year of his contract, you didn't make the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. The year prior, the offense is struggling. In a year when you needed a guy like this, maybe it's not John Ross, but you felt that you needed a guy like this, why did you draft him? He has been in your doghouse all year. And it's almost seeming, and I don't want to be conspiracy theorist here, but it's almost seeming as if this maybe wasn't a Marvin Lewis decision or a Marvin Lewis pick. Maybe this is something that maybe came from Mike Brown. This is something that maybe came from that front office to say, this is the guy we want to take. And I loved John Ross in college. I got to see a lot of him here on the West Coast play at Washington. An explosive player, was one of, if not the best player on the field at all times in college last year when two teams took the field. But if, maybe, many people thought, yeah, he's probably the fourth or fifth best receiver in this year's draft class, depending. Maybe he was just, obviously that 40 time really helped him. But, was he better than Mike Williams? Well, Mike Williams had injury history stuff, but, Mike Williams has proven to be a big-time player. Was he better than Corey Davis? Well, some people absolutely loved Corey Davis. Some people didn't like the small school thing. Whatever. The bottom line is you took who the NFL and teams deemed, by way of how they selected players, the third best receiver, the third best player at his position at number 9 overall. So, when you're looking at Lewis calling out and doing all of this, you have to look at, was the value there? Did the Bengals reach? All of that kind of stuff. But you also have to wonder what this does to a young kid's development in terms of his head coach just going after him publicly over one play. And to Ross's credit, he responded to the words that Lewis said, quote unquote, "It was all my fault. I kind of messed up what I had to do. I think it's a slim chance you're supposed to do something like that. That was all my fault. It had nothing to do with Andy. I thought it was a great ball. I got to listen to what I was told and just continued to do it right." I don't know, guys. I don't know. I don't know what to say here, because we've talked on this program. You've heard about it through various blogs, beat writers, that Marvin Lewis is very inconsistent in his preference to playing rookies, giving them significant time, that sort of thing. Joe Mixon is a little bit of an anomaly, but like I said, 9 carries last week. Yippee. Josh Malone's out there a little bit more now. Maybe 1 catch a game since he's been getting more time. Yay. Carl Lawson has been great when out there. but he continues to be a backup player. I don't understand. This is one of the major criticisms of Marvin Lewis. You know, that I don't understand. And I'm looking at a number of different comments here that I think is really telling at this point. Marvin is losing it. I think Marvin has lost it already. Aaron Felix says, I never believe in the 40 time. I like that guys. I like that guys that win the 50-50 ball. Boyd could be good, Tyler Boyd. I look at Michael Myers. It says Marvin knows he's gone, as in F it mode. I like that one. They should have traded up for a better running back, says Jason Von Steen. What I would like, and give me 1 second, guys. I hate to interrupt a live broadcast. Apparently, there's some scratchiness, and hopefully that hasn't taken place too long. Unfortunately, this is what happens with Google Hangouts. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try and just alter it, and hopefully it gets better. Give me 1 second. How's that? Is that better, guys? Can you hear me? Guys, I apologize. This is a kind of a Google Hangouts thing. Okay, cool. Looks like it's better. Hopefully that wasn't going on too long. I apologize for that. And of recording live. We talked about this. We get to splice and edit afterwards. Usually my co-host, if either he or I have issues with mics and stuff, we can kind of side chat each other and let us know. But I appreciate you letting me know. Thanks for still bearing with me on that. I apologize. I don't know what was going on there. But at any rate, hopefully it wasn't for too long that was going on with my mic. But what I was saying, there was a comment here saying that, you know, maybe they should have moved up for a better running back. I don't know what round that was referencing, but my thought is, you know, if you did like John Ross, there is a chance that he could have been there a few picks back, especially when you have teams like the Chiefs moving up for a quarterback and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Maybe move back a few picks if you're able. Collect an offensive lineman or collect an extra pick you can use in the second or third round for an offensive lineman. Still get Ross a few picks later. Team that way. That would have been my preference. And I still have high hopes for John Ross. I think, unfortunately, John Ross has stepped into the worst possible type of situation for himself. There were things that John Ross needed to clean up in his game, in terms of, you know, maybe being a little more physical at the line of scrimmage. He was better than many people believe he was at getting off jams in college. But obviously these are NFL cornerbacks that he's facing. So that's one. Obviously learning route trees and learning the playbook is another. But he's got speed. He's got shiftiness. He's got explosive ability. You drafted the guy for a reason, and now all you're doing is raking him through the coals for one play when you're asked about it. He comes to a team that was already kind of having some issues on offense, already having some coaching issues. Second season, he loses an offensive coordinator. You get a new offensive coordinator who has never been an offensive coordinator in this league as well. And now you're expected to kind of learn on the fly again. Not a good situation for John Ross, and unfortunately, like a couple of other players that the Bengals have drafted recently in the first round, Ray Kirkpatrick, Cedric Ogbuehi, guys like that, this might be what turns into a red shirt type of season for John Ross. The only saving grace, not only if, aside from the Bengals potentially making a late playoff push this year, but getting him, you know, even if this season continues to spiral out of control, getting him on the field and getting him touches, even if it's, hey, run these 4 plays and let's see what you can do. I think it's time for the Bengals to just, at some point, there's kind of a paralysis by overanalysis type of thing. And I think the Bengals are there this week. Chris Berrien says, I'd love to see Ross in practice just to see what's going wrong with him. Obviously, there are things happening that we're not privy to seeing. There are things that, maybe I heard Dave Lapham say a couple of weeks ago when asked about it, they think that 4.2 speed that he has doesn't show up in practice because he's thinking too much. He's trying to run the right routes too much, and that speed, he just doesn't just go and know what he's doing as he did at Washington. Okay, I understand that. But why not give him a look at on special teams? He was an outstanding returner at Washington. Why not try and just give him a gadget play here and there where it's low pressure? Why not try and give him a simple little slant where you give him yards after the catch opportunity, another thing that he excelled at Washington? Why not try and really simplify things for the kid? I think they might be trying to, but there seems to be a very big disconnect there, and unfortunately, it's with Marvin Lewis and John Ross. So far, Marvin Lewis did not really back up Vontaze Burfict. That may or may not be warranted in terms of a player coming out and saying that the officials may be out to get Burfict. Did not come to the defense of Jeremy Hill, who opted for ankle surgery and kind of subtly called him out. And now he absolutely roasts John Ross publicly. Not a good situation in Cincinnati, not a good situation between player relationships and the coach, especially with a coach who has long been deemed a quote-unquote player's coach. So interesting stuff going on there. I will be taking a couple of listener questions at the end of the program if we have time. So leave those in the YouTube chat. If you're watching us through Cincy Jungle, you can leave them there, or you can shoot them over to us on Twitter. If you have a chance, I'll try and get to a couple of those. I'm expecting my co-host Scott Schultze. I don't know. I did get an email from him saying his tough time getting down to bed. So we'll see. We'll see if he ends up making it. But I know he had planned to. Before we get to maybe a question or two from you folks, let's talk about the game coming up here against the Broncos that the Bengals have simply not fared well against recently, especially under Marvin Lewis, which is interesting because many people remember the Bengals had back in 2014 against Peyton Manning. And, it was rainy. It was at Paul Brown Stadium. One of the bigger wins in modern Bengals history, given who they beat, the team, the quarterback they beat, Peyton Manning, even though he wasn't playing that well at that point. And just the severity of the game and clinching a playoff spot, that sort of thing. Marvin Lewis has become the Bengals head coach in 2003. The Bengals are, let's see here, 2-7. 2-7 against the Denver Broncos by my account. This plays into the thing of, the Denver Broncos are usually very competitive, if not known as an elite team. They just won a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Usually the Bengals, when they play this team, it's a high-profile game. I can think of at least 3 Monday night games that of these games. We're looking at December of 2015, that game when it was A.J. McCarron and Brock Osweiler. Bengals had a big lead, didn't do anything, and ended up losing. Obviously, that loss contributed to them playing the Steelers that year. Before the win, as I mentioned, against Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos. And then the big win in 2004 where Chad Johnson and Carson Palmer had a big game, and that was a big win for them there. But two of the wins were on Monday night, so I guess that kind of plays against the primetime stigma, but you still look at it, premier team, they still have trouble winning games against this team, and that doesn't bode well. Last year, I actually was in the game at the game at Paul Brown Stadium in attendance last year. I kind of felt that should have been a gimme win for the Bengals, given that Trevor Siemian was their quarterback, and I thought the Bengals just, home opener, I thought they had it sealed. They got embarrassed. And Emmanuel Sanders had over 100 yards receiving. They combined for 3 receiving touchdowns. Adam Jones and Drake Kirkpatrick got absolutely torched, as did the safeties that day. Very, very embarrassing performance last year against the Broncos. And this isn't the same Broncos team. And if you have seen or heard anything going on with that team, you would have seen and heard many comments by players that seem very similar to those of the Bengals players, namely Drake Kirkpatrick and others who have kind of been a little bit more vocal of what the Bengals need to do in order to turn things around, or the frustration of losing. This week, I think this is a very winnable game for the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, both teams are 3-6. Brock Osweiler doesn't strike a ton of fear in me, but this is just a team that Bengals against. This is a team that it just gives them fits. Anytime you got Von Miller, Shane Ray, and guys like that coming off of the edge, that's an issue. The Bengals don't seem to fare well against that zone read rushing scheme on defense. Inexplicably, I don't know exactly why that is, but they just don't seem to fare very well against that. So could be a big day for C.J. Anderson and Jamal Charles. We'll see. Obviously, in a funny way, the individual matchup that probably most people will be watching will be Domata Peko against Russell Bodine. Have been big whipping boys for the Bengals over the past few seasons. Pico, of course, left this offseason to go to the Broncos after spending 11 years with the Bengals. There were a lot of years that Pico was a valued member of the defense. I think a lot of fans who soured on him kind of in the 2014, 2015, 2016 years kind of forget some of those earlier teams he was on where the defense wasn't as strong, but he was a decent player for them. Obviously a team leader, great guy in the community, that sort of thing. But by most accounts, coming from Denver, he's been a great pickup for them. And Denver is number 5 overall in terms of allowing rushing yards per game. He's a big part of that. Russell Bodine has struggled with the Bengals. The Bengals are one of the worst teams in the league, not only in time of possession, but in running the football, which obviously correlate. If you're not running the ball, you're not hanging on to it very long. So, that's just a big battle and a big key to this game. If the Bengals, and hey, maybe the commitment this week is we're getting Joe Mixon now that Jeremy Hill's out of the picture. We're giving Giovanni Bernard 5 to 8 touches, and we're giving Joe Mixon 25 to 30 touches, and that's the commitment this week. And shouldn't, to be honest with you. I think that is something that the offense can maybe utilize, hang their hats on, and try and do some damage on the ground, even though the Broncos defense is pretty stout. The Bengals defense, again, we talked about the ups and downs when referencing the Titans game earlier this episode, but they can get after the quarterback still. That's going to be an issue for a very immobile Brock Osweiler. They can, they don't really turn the ball over very often, but, they make the occasional play. And it's really going to be, if the defense is going to play well, the offense is going to need to stay on the field, sustain drives. And I think that's going to be key. Unfortunately, I don't know that I see that happening, given the fact that they're going up against a good Broncos defense, and the Bengals offense has absolutely been struggling. So unless they can continue to find these big plays to AJ Green, unless Joe Mixon can suddenly becomes better this week and can open up holes for Joe Mixon, or Mixon can create for himself. I don't really see this one falling the Bengals' way, unfortunately. Just tough venue, a team they struggle against. I think maybe 17-14 Denver or 20-13 Denver, something like that, unfortunately, is kind of what I see. But I do think it's a winnable game for the Bengals, and I do think they could go out of that venue with a win if they're able to do it. You see, I'm seeing a couple of comments here before we get out of here. This is an interesting one to me. A good friend Royal Flush 513 says should start opposite of Atkins, and he was disagreed with by Gregory Hoffman, saying Billings is better than Glasgow. Obviously, the coaches really like Glasgow. He's been getting more snaps than Billings and doing a bit more. I see him out there frequently, yet I don't see him making the wow plays. Unfortunately, Billings, I've seen him make some pretty decent plays and some plays where you just want to cover your eyes and and hide in shame. I believe it was last week against the Titans. He had to rights in the backfield on a deep in Bengals territory, missed the tackle. He shed the block nicely, missed the tackle, and Murray went into the end zone for a touchdown. Not good. Again, Billings is a guy that they drafted last year and missed all of last year with an injury. And unfortunately, it seemed as if two of their most exciting picks of the class, Billings and William Jackson, kind of spent redshirt years last year as well, which stunk. But, you're seeing some things from Jackson. You're seeing some things from Billings. I do like Glasgow. I think he's more of a rotational piece. And I think, I don't know if I'm ready to say this guy should start over this guy or what have you, just because nothing seems to be really working all that well for the Bengals at this point. But I think in terms of upside, the upside with Billings is far higher than it is with Glasgow. But both guys serve different purposes and do different things. So both are valuable members. I think obviously both are very young, as I mentioned, and the team needs to get them out there more and see, especially at 3 and 6, they need to get them both out there more and see what they can give to this team coming out. Aaron Felix, in terms of what I said about running the football this week, says, I would love to just run the ball a lot and see what happens. Tim Jones says you'd kill Mixon in the process. Maybe. Mixon has proven, though, is a pretty tough guy, and he's pretty talented. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. This is a question from K Rhodes here. Westerman and Smith next to each other on the line, big bodies to make a hole for Mixon. I kind of wonder what the Bengals' plan is with J.J. Diehlmann and Christian Westerman. More so Westerman. I think Westerman, when the Bengals drafted him in the 5th round last year, was a guy that some people were talking as a 2nd or 3rd round player and a guy who could step in for certain teams and start. Some ability to play center. Yet, for some reason, I get that Trey Hopkins has looked good in preseason games. I get that there are other players who, they want to check out as well on that line and really try and figure out the best formula. As a guy that I thought would go in and be a guy that could compete for a starting spot. Maybe not last year, but especially this year with Zeitler going, and his name has barely mentioned. So I don't understand what's going on with that one either. It's another young player that I was excited about that I don't know what the coach, how the coaches are feeling about him right now. J.J. Diehlmann, obviously a guy they cut and they got back on the practice squad, but two guys that they obviously liked. They have versatility, that sort of thing. Kind of interested to see what is ahead for those guys. And obviously, again, as this season potentially spirals out of control, that may be something we see as a rotation towards the last few games of the season. But that's down the road. The Bengals have a game this week against Denver, and they do have a chance to kind of breathe some life back into their season. Unfortunately, they lost to a number of AFC teams and AFC North teams so far. That doesn't help them, but they've got matches against Pittsburgh, rematch against Pittsburgh, rematch against Baltimore, rematch against Cleveland. They've got this week against Denver. They can make some noise. It would probably require them to be somewhere in the 9-7 range. So they would really need to play a completely different style of football, really, than they've been playing. But it's possible. We'll see. Trying to be positive for old Chris Berry in there. Guys, I'm going to get out of here. My co-host, I guess, had some issues with his little one, and I got to go keep an eye on my little one this evening. I greatly appreciate all of you tuning in. Essentially a monologue from me tonight, but hopefully that was okay. And thanks for dealing with some of the little sound issues that occurred earlier in the evening. But appreciate all the live viewers, all your questions, all of your chat in the YouTube chat. I appreciate it. You guys helped keep this episode going because I was loving some of the comments and questions that you guys brought there. So appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in every week. Again, you can get this show on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com, and you can get in touch with the program via Twitter at BengalsOBI and email the obinsider@gmail.com. We love to hear from you guys, and we will continue to bring this show to you as long as you like it and as long as you want to see our ugly mugs every week or listen to our terrible voices every week. We'll continue to bring it to you, but appreciate all of you folks that listen to this program. Hang in there. Hopefully there's some better days around the corner for the Bengals. And if it's not going to be in 2017, maybe it'll be in 2018 with some changes. Hey, hang in there. It's football. It's supposed to be fun. Let's try and have some fun with it. For my co-host, Scott Schultze, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We'll see you next episode.